I think when we were kids, we all pretended to go out on great adventures exploring exotic lands, fighting bad guys. But these kids had it a little different. Instead, they actually went on adventures. Today, I'm pitting Mike Jones from Startropics against Ninten from Earthbound Beginnings slash Mother in a fight. I am Baron Karza, and I took the time to answer the question you never frickin' asked. Welcome to Karza's Arena of Death. Theme, for any of you wondering what the theme is, basically normal kids from the good old US of A who fight aliens with everyday objects and psychic powers. A bonus connection would be Star Tropics never originally released in Japan, while Mother, it was the opposite. It was a Japan only title for a long time. Mike Jones was your typical high school student. Probably got decent grades, is the ace pitcher of the school baseball team, and you wouldn't have what you wouldn't have guessed is that his uncle is the famous archaeologist Dr. Steve Jones, and yes, that's an Indiana Jones reference. One day, his uncle invited him to Sea Island to help him out with some archaeological digs, but when he arrived at the Coral Cola village, yes, every village ends in the suffix cola, Dr. Jones is revealed to have been abducted. The chief of the village gives Mike a yo-yo, which, don't be fooled, that thing is surprisingly potent, and this starts off a long, arduous journey that involved saving dolphins, beating the shit out of overgrown marine life, meeting Rob the robot, dressing, a pretty cool letter, and at the end of it, and near the end, Mike found his uncle near a meteorite. Turns out his uncle's archaeological findings led him to discovering three magic cubes that contain an ancient race of aliens called the Argonians. No, not the lizard people from Skyrim. Anyway, the Argonians tried to escape the evil warlord, Zoda. And then Mike knew what he had to do: collect the cubes, shove bananas in his ears, kill Zoda, which he did, and after Zoda's defeat, the Argonians were freed from some mystical prison. And I think Mike developed a crush on one of them. After the events of Star Tropics 1, Mike and his uncle returned to their home in Seattle. With some downtime available, Dr. Jones tries to decipher a text that he found in the Argonian ship. I assume that in an attempt to repay the debt that they owed Mike, one of the Argonians, Micah, telepathically gave Mike some information revealed to her in a dream by her father. Mike then goes to his uncle Jones to help him decode the text. Turns out it was a magic word. Pa pa mau mau. And with those words, Mike is sent back in time to the Stone Age. While in the Stone Age, Mike finds an artifact called a tetrad. Turns out these are scattered throughout time and space, and Zoda wants them. Obviously, Zoda getting the MacGuffins is a bad thing, so Mike traveled through time collecting them, beating the shit out of Zoda each time they meet. And during that journey, Mike meets Cleopatra, who he has to deliver a pizza to. And for a moment, I thought this was a samurai could have faxed Abraham Lincoln type situation, but I looked it up and turns out pizza wouldn't be a thing dur- till later. I've never felt so disappointed. After Mike defeated Zelda for good, he got all the tetrads, freeing Micah's dad. And the game ends with Mike chasing the Argonian ship as it flies into space. Yep, Mike definitely had feelings for Micah. For weapons, first off, we got Mike's yo-yo, which can be upgraded to the shooting star and upgraded again into the supernova. With each upgrade, the yo-yo increases both in power, speed, and range. In Startropics 2, he has something that functions very similar in the gameplay sense, being being his psychic powers, which he learned from a monkey. Basically, just shoots psychic projectiles. One thing that's worth noting is that both the yo-yo and the psychic powers, they will downgrade if Mike takes a certain amount of damage, and they will go down a level. So the yo-yo, for example, will it'll go from supernova to shooting star to plain old yo-yo. Same thing works for the psychic powers. But Mike has a katana, which, although slower, does more damage and does not downgrade regardless of Mike's HP. It's sort of like a fallback weapon. You also got the katana from Leonardo da Vinci, and I think that's a TMNT reference. Eh, he's got some other weapons. He has a baseball bat, nice for knocking back enemies in the events that they surround him. He can throw rocks. He's got a slingshot, which is a good mid-range attack, and the torch is a nice short-range projectile. He's got a weapon similar to the slingshot called the thrower. He's got the bolus, which is surprisingly not too mobilizes enemies, but acts as a long-range projectile. He's got the miracle mirror to reflect projectiles right back at you. If he is having problems with teleporting enemies, he's got the spiked shoes to allow him to basically attack every enemy in a room. He's got the spike balls, a mid-range projectile. He has the asterisk, which is a projectile that Mike can split in two on command after throwing it. He has this triple spike ball, which allows him to throw three long-range projectiles. He's got two types of ray guns. One fires only one projectile at a time, but it's pretty fast. And the other fires three, but it's slower in comparison. Besides that, he's got a few magical items. He's got the medicine, which restores some health. He's got the vitamin and vitamin X to fully restore his health. The star, which is likely a Mario reference since it makes Mike invincible. He's got the wand, which reveals invisible enemies. The snowman, which can freeze some enemies for a short period of time, and the stopwatch, which can freeze time, but some enemies are merely slowed down by it. Stat wise, Mike can presumably dodge projectiles from plasma guns, and according to a random source I found on the internet, a plasma bullet can move at about 100,000 meters per second. According, I found a Surprisingly, Mike has actually been at least partially documented in verses, and I've discovered that the snow doll is worth an incredibly large amount. Is worth 1.396631 E plus 12 joules. Now, there's a bit of explaining to do. The the calculation came from just measuring the amount of water that in one of the boss rooms in Startropics and looking at the output required from the snowman doll to freeze said water. It's likely Mike can has an output that is much higher than the snow doll since he defeated Zoda, a guy so powerful that the Argonians, a race that possess numerous magical objects, opted to flee from him instead of fight. But take this calculation with a grain of salt. Weaknesses, there's not much notable. He's an old video game character, but if you want to try, Mike is kind of impulsive, and since when Zoda started messing with his mind, his first instinct was to shove bananas in his head. Also, there's the aforementioned yo-yo and psychic powers being weakened. Another limitation worth pointing out is that Mike is that most of the items Mike has, he can only use a limited amount for a limited amount of uses, and then he'll just run out of them, and he'll just run out of them. He can't use them anymore. All right. Sometime in the early 1900s, a woman named Maria and her husband George were abducted by aliens. However, instead of being experimented on for breeding purposes or having their organs harvested, the aliens tasked them with raising the baby Geeg. Maria would often sing songs to the baby alien, but George was more interested in what made everything tick around the spaceship, and he discovered PSI, basically psychic magic, which surprisingly has been researched in the real world as far back as the 1800s. Back to Mother. Eventually, George got a good enough understanding of PSI to harness it and decided, hey, I don't really like it out here in space, and left the spaceship in an escape pod with Maria, leaving the baby Geek heartbroken. Fast forward about 100 years later, Geek is ordered to destroy the Earth by his superiors for fear that humans may use their PSI powers against them. Enter Maria's great grandson, Ninten, who lives in the small town of Podunk with his parents and younger twin sister, Minnie and Mimi. Ninten quite lived quite the unassuming life until one day the inanimate objects became animate due to poltergeist activity. Luckily, this problem had an easy fix. Just demolish the furniture of the house until you find the source. After that problem was taken care of, Ninten began to investigate the phenomenon, and it turns out Geek was behind it. Pretty early in his journey, Ninten ends up in a place called Magicant where he meets Queen Mary, who lost her memories and asked Ninten to retrieve the 8 melodies she forgot. Ninten, being the good Samaritan that he is, teamed up with Anna, Lloyd, Teddy, and once he returned to Magicant and played the 8 melodies, causing Mary to remember everything. It turns out she's Maria, and she explains to Ninten everything I told you at the beginning of this section. Also, Magicant is a physical representation of Maria's consciousness. With her, with her job of teaching the 8 melodies to the party complete, Maria and the Magicant just faded from existence. So with that out of the way, our three heroes traveled up to Mount Itoi to face Geeg, but none of their attacks worked. Luckily, the 8 melodies weren't just useless MacGuffins, but the key to beating Geeg. So they just go full friggin' Disney and start singing, bringing up conflicting memories in Geeg, making him retreat. But he vowed to return, and, and dear God, it was a nightmare when he did. For weapons, Ninten has numerous baseball bats, but his strongest is Hank's bat, which is a baseball bat that was personally autographed. Don't know by who. He also has a slingshot and a boomerang. For defense, he has various pendants, like the H2O pendant, which reduces damage from fire based attacks. The fire pendant reduces damage from ice based attacks. The earth pendant reduces damage from electrical attacks. The sea pendant reduces damage from all the previously mentioned types of attacks, and the Franklin badge, which reflects the PK beam. Besides weapons and armor, he also has a bunch of items that can essentially affect stats in some ways. He has the bullhorn, which Ninten can use to shout, "Your mother is calling," and if the enemy believes it, their fight stat decreases. Basically, their chances of getting a critical hit goes down. But if they don't believe that their mother is calling, their offense increases. Ninten also has a flea bag, which he can throw at someone, which causes their defense and offense to decrease. He has the flash dart, the opposite of a flashlight, which decreases accuracy of attacks. He has the rope, which makes an enemy unable to do anything for a random amount of turns. He has a sticky machine, which does the same thing as the rope. He has the asthma spray, which cures Ninten of his asthma attacks. And he has the mouthwash, which cures Ninten of the cold. he ha- but arguably Ninten's most useful abilities are his PSI abilities. He has the fourth slip, which allows him to escape battle, the defense down, which lowers a target's durability or defense stat, the defense up, which raises Ninten's defense, offense up, which raises Ninten's offense. He has the power shield, which reflects all damage dealt to Ninten, both physical and PSI based ones. The PSI shield halves all damage from PSI attacks. The quick up increases Ninten's speed, and heal cures all status ailments. He also has the life up, which heals him, and as well as the teleport fun. He also has teleport, which is his way of fast travel. Now, it's a little hard to find stats for Ninten since he's an old school JRPG character. So there isn't much in the way of direct feats. But we know Ninten is comparable to Ness from Earthbound. Now, there's no. Now, Ninten is nowhere near as powerful as Ness at his strongest. The Magic Hand gives Ness some high dimensional nonsense that could probably allow him to solo Dragon Ball if we were going to wank it to the absolute extreme. But pre Magic Hand Ness is pretty comparable to Ninten since they fought some of the same foes. Ness can survive explosions from the reactor robo, which is basically a walking nuke. Now let's be realistic here. There's no way that thing is as potent as the bombs dropped in Japan. So we need to look at the conservative estimate. We are going to assume that the reactor robo is as powerful as the smallest nuke in the world, the W-54. Now there are various different versions of this bomb. Some yield a measly 10 tons of TNT, but I'm going to go with the highest number of 1,000 tons of TNT. Mind you, this isn't the strongest attack Ness can tank in the game, so he, and by extension Ninten, should be able to survive a lot more. Speed-wise, he can run 700 meters in 13 seconds, and he should be comparable to Lucas, who is able to dodge light-based attacks, putting his reaction speed at relativistic at least. At least. Weaknesses? When Ninten is exposed to smoke, his asthma will start kicking in, and when he goes through an asthma attack, he will be unable to attack. When he gets a cold, he basically takes damage over time. And finally, he also has a limited amount of PSI. Like, if he keeps spamming PSI abilities, he's gonna run out. I'm going to level with you. Originally, I thought this fight was going to be really close. But once I did research on Ninten, I knew Mike was just screwed. So Ninten is able to survive and possibly generate an output of 1,000 tons of TNT, and Mike is capable to of like 1.14 E plus 12 joules or whatever. All right, let's convert that into gigajoules. That puts Ninten at 4,184 gigajoules, and Mike at 1,140 gigajoules, if you round it up. So Ninten is like 4 times tougher than Mike, add in the fact that Ninten can boost his defense and nerf Mike's offense. Mike is going to have a hard time even hurting Ninten. But what if we were going to lowball Ninten, assuming the reactor robo explosion was 250 gigajoules, putting both fighters in the same range, basically putting both fighters in the same ballpark. Mike should have an easier time beating Ninten, right? Wrong! Remember the power shield? You know, that ability that allows Ninten to just reflect anything Mike throws at him? Yeah, Mike is more likely to hurt himself when attacking Ninten, but wait, the power shield doesn't reflect PK Beam. And you could argue Mike's psionic projectile is like PK Beam. Too bad. Ninten has the Franklin badge. And to make things worse is that Ninten is probably going to have the first move considering how much faster than Mike he is. So basically, fight starts, Ninten uses power shield, and Mike can't hurt him. The only win cons Mike has on Ninten is using the smoke from the torches to trigger an asthma attack, or using the snowman to give him a cold. Except Ninten has a counter to that too, with the mouthwash and the respirator. Even the invincibility star won't help Mike since Ninten can just put him to sleep and wait out the effects. Ninten has a counter. Has a counter to everything Mike has. His tools will really only just delay Mike's inevitable loss. Honestly, at first I thought Mike was going to win this since he had loads of offensive abilities and Ninten had zero offensive PSI abilities, but turns out Mike just didn't stand a chance. Sucks. I wanted him to win. The winner is